My name is Sarah Mitchell. I am 32 years old, and for the past 10 years I have worn the uniform of the United States Army with pride, honor, and unwavering dedication. I have served 3 tours overseas, twice in Iraq and once in Afghanistan. Working as an intelligence specialist in some of the most dangerous regions on Earth, I have briefed generals, coordinated with international allies, and helped save countless lives through the intelligence I gathered and analyzed. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for the war I would have to fight on home soil against the people who were supposed to love me most. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. They say blood is thicker than water, but what they don't tell you is that sometimes blood can poison everything it touches. The uniform I wore with such pride became a target for mockery in my own home. The service I gave to my country became ammunition for those who wanted to paint me as broken, unstable, dangerous. And the moment that should have been the proudest in our family's military legacy became the battlefield where I would discover just how far some people will go to protect their secret. This is the story of how my own family tried to erase me from the most important day of my father's military career. How they systematically destroyed my reputation to keep me away from a ceremony that would change everything, and how one moment of recognition from a 4-star general would expose a conspiracy that went deeper than I ever imagined possible. This is the story of betrayal, discovery, and the shocking truth that sometimes the enemy isn't wearing a foreign uniform. Sometimes the enemy is sitting at your own dinner table. The day everything started to unravel was supposed to be the beginning of the best week of my life. It was a crisp October morning at Fort Campbell, Kentucky, and I was sitting in my small apartment in nearby Hopkinsville drinking coffee and reading through the official notification that had arrived the previous evening. Colonel Robert Mitchell, my father, was being promoted to Brigadier General. 1 star, the culmination of 32 years of dedicated military service, and the fulfillment of a dream our entire family had shared for as long as I could remember. I held the formal invitation in my hands, reading it for the 4th time, feeling that familiar swell of pride that came whenever I thought about Dad's career. He had enlisted as a private right out of high school, worked his way up through every rank, earned his commission through officer candidate school, and dedicated his entire adult life to serving his country. Now at 55 years old, he was about to receive the recognition he deserved. The ceremony was scheduled for the following Saturday at the base command center. Family members, distinguished guests, fellow officers, and members of the local community would gather to witness this historic moment. I had already requested leave from my duties, pressed my dress blues until they were perfect, and started planning what I would say to Dad afterward. This was our moment, our family's moment. The day when decades of sacrifice and service would be officially recognized. I should have been completely happy. Instead, there was something nagging at me, a small voice in the back of my mind that had been growing louder over the past few weeks. It started with little things, barely noticeable inconsistencies in conversations with my family, but it had grown into something I couldn't ignore. My phone buzzed with a text message. It was from my younger brother Danny, who lived in Nashville with his wife Jessica, about 45 minutes from the base. The message was brief and casual, the kind of thing that would seem perfectly normal to anyone who didn't know our family dynamics. Hey sis, hope you're doing well. Mom wanted me to ask if you've been taking your medication regularly. She's worried about you. I stared at the message, reading it 3 times before the full implication hit me. Medication. I wasn't taking any medication, had never been prescribed anything beyond the occasional antibiotic for routine infections. I was in perfect health, both physically and mentally, with clean psychological evaluations from my most recent fitness review just 6 months earlier. I called Danny immediately. He answered on the 3rd ring, his voice carrying that carefully neutral tone he'd been using with me more and more frequently. Sarah, hey, what's up? What medication is Mom talking about? I'm not taking any medication. There was a pause, the kind of silence that stretches just long enough to let you know the person on the other end is choosing their words very carefully. Oh, that. I think she meant the stuff the VA prescribed for anxiety. You know, after you got back from Afghanistan, Danny, I was never prescribed anxiety medication. I never even went to the VA for mental health services. My psychological evaluation was completely clean. Another pause. Are you sure about that? Because Mom said you mentioned something about having trouble sleeping, feeling on edge all the time. She was just concerned. I felt a cold knot forming in my stomach. I never said any of those things to Mom. Where is she getting this information? Look, Sarah, maybe you just don't remember. You've been under a lot of stress lately, dealing with the transition back to civilian duty cycles and everything. Sometimes people forget conversations when they're overwhelmed. The conversation continued for another few minutes, but I barely heard the rest of it. My mind was racing, trying to process what had just happened. My brother was suggesting that I was either lying about my mental health status or so unstable that I couldn't remember my own medical treatment. Neither option made any sense, but the casual way he presented these possibilities suggested this wasn't the first time the topic had come up. After I hung up, I sat in my apartment trying to understand what was happening. Over the past few months, there had been subtle changes in the way my family interacted with me, conversations that seemed to stop when I entered rooms, plans made without including me, a growing sense that I was being treated like a problem to be managed rather than a family member to be included. I had attributed it to the normal adjustment period that military families go through when someone returns from deployment. Everyone needs time to readjust, to find their rhythm again, to rebuild the connections that distance and danger can strain. But this felt different. This felt deliberate. That afternoon, I decided to visit my parents at their home in Nashville. It was a spontaneous decision, the kind of drop-in visit that had always been welcome in the past. Mom and Dad lived in a modest 2-story brick house in a quiet suburban neighborhood, the same house where Danny and I had grown up, where family dinners and holiday celebrations had created the foundation of my understanding of what home meant. When I arrived, Dad was in the garage, organizing his tools with the methodical precision that had made him an excellent officer. He looked up when he saw me, and his face broke into the warm smile that had greeted me after every deployment, every difficult mission, every time I needed reassurance that I was valued and loved. "Sarah, sweetheart, what brings you by? Not that I'm complaining, but you usually call first. I wanted to talk to you about the promotion ceremony. Make sure I understood all the details correctly." Something shifted in his expression, so quickly that I almost missed it. The warmth didn't disappear, but it became more careful, more guarded. "What details? It's pretty straightforward. Show up, stand at attention, watch me get my star, then celebrate with dinner afterward. Who's organizing the family seating arrangements? Mom mentioned something about RSVPs and coordination, but I haven't heard anything official." Dad set down the wrench he'd been holding and turned to face me fully. "Danny's handling most of the family logistics. You know how he is with that organizational stuff, takes after your mother that way. Has he mentioned anything about seating arrangements for me?" Another pause, longer this time. "Sarah, is everything okay? You seem tense." There it was again, the subtle suggestion that something was wrong with me, that my questions were evidence of instability rather than normal family coordination. I had asked a simple question about seating arrangements for one of the most important events in our family's history, and somehow that had become proof that I was tense, possibly unstable. "I'm fine, Dad. I just want to make sure I know where I'm supposed to be and what's expected of me." "Of course you do. You always want to have all the details sorted out in advance. That's one of the things that makes you such a good intelligence specialist." He meant it as a compliment, but something about the way he said it made me feel like my professional competence was being used to explain away behavior that was somehow problematic, as if my training and skills were signs of obsessive attention to detail rather than assets that had served our country well. Mom appeared in the doorway leading from the house to the garage, wiping her hands on a dish towel. She smiled when she saw me, but like Dad's smile, it seemed more careful than usual. "Sarah, honey, I didn't know you were coming by. Have you eaten? I could make you a sandwich." "I'm fine, Mom. I was just asking Dad about the ceremony arrangements." "Oh, that's all Danny's taking care of everything. You don't need to worry about any of the details. Just show up looking beautiful in your dress uniform and let us handle the rest." The phrase "you don't need to worry" struck me as odd. When had I ever indicated that I was worried? I had simply asked about logistical details. the kind of information any family member would want to know about such an important event. What time should I arrive? What's the parking situation? Are there any special protocols I should be aware of? Mom and Dad exchanged a glance. One of those quick spousal communications that happen so fast you barely notice them unless you're specifically watching for them, but I was watching, and what I saw made the cold knot in my stomach grow large. Sweetie, Mom said, her voice taking on that gentle tone that adults use when they're about to deliver disappointing news to a child. We actually wanted to talk to you about the ceremony. I felt my heartbeat quicken. What about it? Well, it's going to be a very formal affair. Lots of high-ranking officials, media coverage, politicians, the kind of event where everything needs to go smoothly. Okay. And Dodd stepped closer, his expression soft but serious. Sarah, we're worried that you might not be comfortable in that kind of environment. You've been through a lot overseas, and we know how stressful these big official events can be for veterans who are still adjusting. The words hit me like a physical blow. Still adjusting, as if I were some damaged soldier struggling to cope with civilian life, rather than a decorated intelligence specialist with an exemplary service record and perfect psychological evaluations. Dad, I've attended dozens of military ceremonies. I've briefed generals and congressmen. I've maintained composure under enemy fire. Why would you think I can't handle a promotion ceremony? It's not about your professional capabilities, sweetheart. We know you're excellent at your job. It's about your personal comfort level. These events can be overwhelming, especially when you're dealing with the kind of stress that comes with readjusting to stateside duty. What stress? I'm not dealing with any unusual stress. My evaluations are perfect, my work performance is exemplary, and I've had no problems readjusting to anything. Mom moved closer, her voice becoming even gentler, more concerned. Honey, sometimes people don't realize when they're struggling. The signs can be subtle. Increased vigilance, difficulty trusting people, analyzing every situation for potential threats. Danny mentioned that you've been asking a lot of questions lately, seeming suspicious of things that are probably perfectly innocent. I felt like I was falling through ice. My family was describing me as if I were exhibiting symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, as if my professional training in threat assessment had somehow become evidence of mental instability. Every skill that made me good at my job was being reframed as a psychological problem. I haven't been suspicious of anything. I've been asking normal questions about normal family matters. Of course you have, dear, but sometimes what feels normal to us can seem intense to other people. We just think it might be better if you took some time to focus on your own healing and wellness, rather than worrying about family events that are going to be stressful for everyone involved. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, but the conclusion was already clear. My family had decided that I was psychologically unstable, that my presence at Dad's promotion ceremony would be disruptive, and that the best thing for everyone involved would be for me to stay home and work on my supposed mental health issues. They presented it as concern for my well-being, wrapped in gentle language and loving expressions of words. But underneath the careful words, the message was unmistakable. I was not welcome at the most important moment of my father's career, because my family believed I was too damaged to be trusted in public. I left their house in a daze, driving back to my apartment on autopilot, while my mind tried to process what had just happened. Everything I thought I knew about my family, about my place in their lives, about the foundation of love and support that had sustained me through years of dangerous service, had been turned upside down in a single conversation. That night I sat in my apartment with a cup of tea, trying to understand how things had gone so wrong so quickly. 6 months ago I had been their hero daughter, the one who served her country with distinction, who made them proud at military functions and family gatherings. Now suddenly, I was a liability, someone whose presence would be embarrassing, whose mental state was so questionable that my own parents couldn't trust me to attend a ceremony honoring our family's military legacy. I thought about calling Marcus Thompson, my old team leader who now worked in personnel records. Marcus had known me for years, had worked with me in high-stress situations, had seen me perform under pressure that would break most people. He would be able to give me an objective assessment of whether I was exhibiting any signs of psychological distress. But before I could reach for my phone, it buzzed with another text message. This one was from Jessica, Danny's wife, and it was longer than the usual family communication. "Hi Sarah, I hope you're taking care of yourself. Danny told me about the conversation today, and I want you to know that we all love you and support you. Taking time to focus on your mental health is really brave, and we're proud of you for recognizing that you need some space to heal. There's no shame in admitting when we need help. The ceremony is going to be really overwhelming anyway. Lots of cameras and politicians and formal protocols. You'll probably be much more comfortable watching from home. We'll make sure to take lots of pictures and videos so you don't miss anything important. Love you." I read the message 3 times, each reading making me angrier and more confused. Jessica was writing to me as if I had already agreed to skip the ceremony, as if the decision had been made and she was simply offering comfort and support for my choice to prioritize my mental health over family obligations. But I had never made that choice. I had never admitted to needing help or space to heal. I had never expressed any desire to skip the ceremony or watch from home. Yet somehow, the narrative had already been established that I was too unstable to attend, and my family was moving forward with plans that assumed my absence. I spent the rest of the night trying to figure out when and how this narrative had developed. When had my family decided that I was struggling with mental health issues?
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
What specific behaviors or statements had led them to conclude that I was too damaged to be trusted at important family events? The more I thought about it, the more I realized that I couldn't identify any specific incidents that would justify their concerns. Yes, I had been asking questions about family finances and logistics, but those seemed like normal adult conversations. Yes, I maintained the situational awareness that had kept me alive overseas, but that was professional competence, not paranoia. Yes, I preferred to have details and information rather than being surprised by unexpected developments, but that was good planning, not evidence of instability. Unless someone had been deliberately misinterpreting my behavior, reframing normal interactions as signs of psychological distress, unless someone wanted my family to believe that I was unstable, unreliable, potentially dangerous, the thought should have seemed paranoid, exactly the kind of thinking that would justify my family's concern. But as I sat in the darkness of my apartment, reviewing months of subtle changes in family dynamics, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been working very hard to convince the people I loved most that I couldn't be trusted. And if that was true, then I needed to figure out who was behind it and why they wanted me isolated from my family at the exact moment when Dad's promotion would bring our family into the spotlight of military and political attention. Because if there was one thing my intelligence training had taught me, it was that when someone works that hard to control your access to information and people, they're usually hiding something they don't want you to discover. The next morning, I woke up with the kind of clarity that comes after a sleepless night of hard thinking. I had spent hours analyzing every family interaction from the past 6 months, and patterns were emerging that I didn't like. If someone was deliberately poisoning my family against me, I needed evidence, not just suspicions and hurt feelings. I started with what I could verify independently: my medical records, my service evaluations, my psychological assessment. If my family believed I was struggling with mental health issues, there should be some documentation somewhere that supported their concerns. I drove to the base and spent the morning reviewing my complete personnel file with the help of a records clerk who owed me a favor from our deployment day. The results were exactly what I expected, and completely contrary to what my family seemed to believe. My most recent psychological evaluation, conducted just 4 months earlier, showed no signs of stress, anxiety, depression, or adjustment disorder. My performance reviews were consistently excellent, with specific commendations for my ability to remain calm under pressure and maintain professional relationships with colleagues and superiors. My medical records showed no prescriptions for anxiety medication, no visits to mental health services, no indication whatsoever that I was struggling with anything beyond the normal challenges of military life. Either my family had fabricated their concerns out of thin air, or someone had been feeding them false information about my condition and behavior. Given that I trusted my parents and brother to be generally honest people, the second option seemed more likely, which meant someone was lying to them about me. I made copies of all my records, careful to follow proper protocols for handling sensitive information. Then I drove to a coffee shop in downtown Clarksville where I could think without the distractions of base life or my apartment. I spread the documents across a corner table and tried to construct a timeline of when my family's perception of me had changed. The shift seemed to have started about 4 months ago, right around the time Dad's promotion had been announced internally. Before that, family interactions had been normal. Phone calls, visits, holiday plans, all the usual rhythms of a close military family. But sometime in late June or early July, conversations had become more careful, more concerned, filled with gentle probing about my emotional state and stress level. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through months of text messages with Danny and my parents, looking for the first signs of their new narrative about me. What I found was subtle but consistent. Questions about whether I was sleeping well, suggestions that I seemed tired or stressed, offers to help me find resources for veterans who were having trouble adjusting to civilian life. At the time, I had interpreted these messages as normal family concern, the kind of care and attention that military families show for each other. But looking at them with fresh eyes, I could see how they might have been attempts to gauge my mental state, or possibly to plant suggestions that I should be concerned about my own psychological well-being. The breakthrough came when I found a text exchange from early July that I had completely forgotten about. Danny had asked if I was still having nightmares, and I had responded that I rarely remembered my dreams and certainly wasn't having any problems with sleep. But his next message assumed that I had confirmed having nightmares, thanking me for being honest about my struggles and suggesting that I might want to talk to someone professional about trauma processing. I stared at the exchange for several minutes, reading it over and over. Danny had asked about nightmares. I had essentially said I wasn't having any, and he had responded as if I had confirmed that I was struggling with trauma-related sleep disturbances. Either he had completely misunderstood my response, or he had deliberately misinterpreted it to support a narrative he wanted to believe. I kept digging through the messages, finding more examples of the same pattern. Questions that seemed designed to elicit responses that could be interpreted as concerning, followed by expressions of worry that didn't match what I had actually said. It was like watching someone construct a case against me using my own words, twisted and taken out of context. My phone rang, interrupting my analysis. It was Marcus Thompson, calling from the base. "Sarah, I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday, about someone potentially spreading false information about your service record. I did some quiet checking, and there's something you should know." "What kind of something?" "Someone has been making informal inquiries about your fitness for duty, not official requests, just casual questions to people who know you professionally. Questions about your stress levels, your adjustment to stateside duty, whether you've shown any signs of instability or difficulty coping." I felt the coffee shop around me fade into background noise. Who's been asking these questions? That's the interesting part. The inquiries are coming through civilian channels, not military ones. Someone with connections to the base but not official access to personnel information. They're being very careful not to trigger any formal review processes, just gathering informal impressions from people who work with you. Do you know who specifically? I have some ideas, but I need to be careful about how I investigate this. If someone is building a case against you using unofficial channels, they're probably being very strategic about it. I don't want to tip them off that we're onto them. After Marcus hung up, I sat in the coffee shop for another hour, trying to process what I had learned. Someone was systematically gathering negative information about me, or at least trying to create the impression that such information existed. They were using unofficial channels to avoid leaving a paper trail, but they were reaching out to people with professional knowledge of my capabilities and behavior. This wasn't random family concern or misunderstanding. This was deliberate, coordinated, and sophisticated. Someone with knowledge of how military personnel systems worked was trying to build a case that I was psychologically unstable, and they were doing it in a way that would be difficult to trace or disprove. The question was why. What could someone gain by convincing my family and colleagues that I was unfit for duty or mentally unstable? What did they want to prevent me from seeing or doing? The answer hit me like a physical blow. Dad's promotion ceremony. Someone wanted me away from that event, and they were willing to destroy my reputation and my relationship with my family to ensure my absence. I drove back to my apartment and spent the afternoon researching everything I could find about Dad's promotion. The official announcement, the guest list, the schedule of events, the political and military significance of the ceremony. What I found was more extensive than I had realized. This wasn't just a routine promotion ceremony. Dad was being promoted to head a new joint task force focused on cybersecurity and intelligence coordination between military and civilian agencies. His new position would give him access to highly classified information and significant influence over national security policy. The ceremony would be attended by senators, congressmen, high-ranking military officials, and representatives from various intelligence agencies. It was exactly the kind of event where sensitive conversations might happen, where important connections might be made, where someone with intelligence training might overhear or observe things that weren't meant for public consumption. If someone was involved in activities that required secrecy, activities that might be discussed or planned at such an event, they would have every reason to ensure that a trained intelligence specialist wasn't present to notice things that seemed out of place. I started researching the other people who would be attending the ceremony, looking for connections that might explain why my presence would be problematic. The guest list was extensive, but certain names stood out. Business leaders with defense contracts, politicians who served on intelligence committees, military officers whose careers had intersected with my father's over the years. One name in particular caught my attention: General Patricia Hayes, the four-star general who would be presiding over the ceremony. I had heard Dad mention her before, always with respect and admiration, but I didn't know much about her background or current responsibility. A quick search revealed that she had spent significant time in intelligence roles, including several assignments that would have given her access to information about ongoing operations and classified programs. If someone was trying to keep me away from the ceremony, General Hayes might be the reason. She would be the most senior intelligence official present, and if there were conversations or activities that required secrecy, she would likely be involved in them. I was starting to develop a theory, but I needed more information before I could act on it. I called Rachel Kim, the FBI agent I had worked with in Afghanistan. She was now assigned to a domestic counterintelligence unit, and if anyone could help me understand what might be happening, it would be her. Rachel, I need to run something by you. Hypothetically, if someone wanted to prevent an intelligence specialist from attending a high-level military ceremony, what kinds of activities might they be trying to hide? That's a very specific hypothetical, Sarah. Are we talking about something that's actually happening? Possibly. I'm being systematically excluded from my father's promotion ceremony, and someone has been spreading false information about my mental state to justify keeping me away. There was a long pause. Sarah, that's a serious allegation. If what you're describing is true, it suggests either personal vendetta or professional conspiracy. Neither option is good. I have documentation of the false information campaign, and I have evidence that someone is making unofficial inquiries about my fitness for duty. I'm starting to think my exclusion from the ceremony isn't about family dynamics, it's about preventing me from observing something I'm not supposed to see. What kind of something? That's what I need help figuring out. But if I'm right, then whatever is being planned requires enough secrecy that someone is willing to destroy my family relationships to ensure I'm not present. Rachel was quiet for several minutes. Sarah, if you're right about this, you're potentially dealing with people who have significant resources and no hesitation about using them against you. You need to be very careful about how you proceed. I know, but I can't just ignore this. If something illegal or unethical is being planned, and if my father's ceremony is being used as cover for it, then I have a responsibility to investigate. Agreed, but you also have a responsibility to protect yourself. Don't do anything alone, don't confront anyone directly, and don't let anyone know that you're suspicious until you have enough evidence to act decisively. After talking to Rachel, I spent the evening developing a plan. I couldn't attend the ceremony as a family member, but there might be other ways to observe what was happening. I had friends on the base, colleagues who would be working security or logistics for the event. If I could convince one of them to let me know about any unusual activities or conversations, I might be able to gather the information I needed. But first, I needed to understand more about the people who would be attending the ceremony. If someone was using the event as cover for secret activities, they would likely be among the official guests. I started building profiles of everyone on the guest list, looking for connections, patterns, anything that might explain why my presence would be problematic. The work was tedious and time-consuming, but it was familiar. I had done similar analysis countless times in Afghanistan, tracking networks of insurgents and identifying patterns in their communications and activity. The skills that had made me effective overseas were equally applicable to domestic investigation, even when the targets were American citizens in positions of power and authority. By midnight, I had identified several attendees, whose backgrounds and current positions made them potential persons of interest. Defense contractors with questionable business practices, politicians with financial ties to foreign governments, military officers, whose career trajectories had included assignments that were classified beyond my clearance level. But the most concerning discovery was a pattern of connections between several attendees and companies that had been flagged by various intelligence agencies for potential security violation. Nothing definitive, nothing that would justify formal investigation, but enough red flags to suggest that the guest list included people who might be involved in activities that required secrecy. If I was right, then my father's promotion ceremony was being used as a legitimate cover for illegitimate activities, and someone had worked very hard to ensure that the one person most likely to notice suspicious behavior would not be present to observe it. The realization filled me with a mixture of anger and determination. Someone had attacked my reputation, manipulated my family, and tried to isolate me from the people I loved most, all to prevent me from doing the job I had been trained to do. They had underestimated me, assuming that destroying my family relationships would be enough to keep me away from their activities. They were wrong. If anything, their campaign against me had only strengthened my resolve to discover what they were trying to hide. And if they thought that keeping me out of the ceremony would prevent me from investigating their activities, they were about to learn that an intelligence specialist doesn't need an invitation to gather information. I spent the next few days developing a comprehensive surveillance plan. I couldn't attend the ceremony, but I could monitor communications, track movements, and analyze patterns of behavior among the attendees. I had access to various databases and monitoring systems through my work, and I knew how to use them without leaving traces that would reveal my investigation. The plan was risky, and it required me to bend several rules about the use of military intelligence resources for personal investigations. But if I was right about what was happening, then this wasn't really a personal matter. It was a potential threat to national security, and I had a duty to investigate it regardless of the personal cost. 3 days before the ceremony, I put my plan into action. I started by monitoring communications traffic from known associates of the suspicious attendees, looking for any unusual patterns or coded language that might indicate coordinated activity. I tracked travel patterns, meeting schedules, and financial transactions, building a picture of how the various players were positioning themselves for the event. What I found confirmed my worst suspicion. Several of the attendees had made unusual travel arrangements, arriving in the area days before the ceremony, and staying in locations that were not typical for official guests. Communications between certain individuals had increased significantly in the weeks leading up to the event, using language and references that suggested coordination of activities beyond the official ceremony. Most concerning of all, I discovered that several foreign nationals with ties to intelligence services had entered the country in the past month, all using legitimate business visas, but with travel patterns that brought them to the Nashville area in the days surrounding Dad's ceremony. I was no longer looking at a simple case of someone trying to exclude me from a family event. I was looking at what appeared to be a coordinated intelligence operation, using my father's promotion ceremony as cover for activities that could potentially compromise national security. The weight of that realization settled over me like a physical burden. My father, who had dedicated his life to serving his country, was being used as an unwitting cover for activities that could betray everything he had worked for. The ceremony, that should have been the proudest moment of his career was being perverted into something that could destroy not just his reputation, but potentially harm the security of the nation he had sworn to protect. I knew I had to act, but I also knew that I couldn't do it alone. The scope of what I was uncovering was beyond my capabilities as a single intelligence specialist. I needed help from people with more authority and resources than I possessed. But I also knew that time was running out. The ceremony was in 3 days, and whatever was being planned would likely happen during or immediately after the official events. If I was going to prevent it, I needed to move quickly and decisively. The war I had been fighting for my family's trust and respect had become something much larger and more dangerous. I was no longer just trying to prove my mental stability or earn my place at Dad's ceremony. I was trying to prevent what could be a significant breach of national security, using skills and knowledge that I had gained through years of service to the country that someone was now trying to betray, and I was running out of time to stop that. The call came at 4:30 in the morning, 2 days before Dad's ceremony. I had been awake for hours cross-referencing intelligence reports and financial records when my phone buzzed with an unknown number. My training told me not to answer, but something deeper, some instinct honed by years of navigating dangerous situations, made me pick up. Specialist Mitchell. The voice was electronically distorted, neither male nor female, speaking in measured tones that carried an undertone of menace. You need to stop. I sat up straighter, my mind instantly alert despite the early hour. Stop what? Your investigation, your questions, your attempts to insert yourself into matters that don't concern you. I don't know what you're talking about. Yes, you do. You've been monitoring communications, accessing databases, building profiles of ceremony attendees. This ends now. The fact that they knew about my investigation meant they had been watching me far more closely than I had realized. They knew what resources I was using, what information I was accessing, possibly even where I was conducting my research. The level of surveillance required for that kind of knowledge suggested resources and capabilities that went far beyond what I had been imagining. If you have nothing to hide, then there's nothing for you to worry about, I said, keeping my voice steady despite the adrenaline now coursing through my system. We have everything to hide, and we're very good at it. Your father's ceremony will proceed as planned. You will not attend. You will not interfere. You will not contact anyone else about your suspicions. If you comply, your family's reputation remains intact, and your father enjoys his promotion without complications. And if I don't comply, then your family learns that their beloved daughter and sister has been using classified military resources to conduct unauthorized surveillance on American citizens. Your security clearance gets revoked, your military career ends in disgrace, and you spend the next several years defending yourself against charges of espionage and treason. The threat was delivered with the kind of calm precision that made it absolutely credible. They had been monitoring my activities closely enough to know exactly what rules I had bent and what resources I had used inappropriately. They could indeed destroy my career and my freedom if they chose to expose my investigation. You have 24 hours to decide, the voice continued. Attend the ceremony and we'll assume you've chosen poorly. Stay away and this conversation never happened. The line went dead. I sat in the darkness of my apartment, holding my phone and trying to process what had just occurred. Someone with significant resources and capabilities had been monitoring my investigation, and they were prepared to destroy my life to prevent me from interfering with whatever they had planned for Dad's ceremony. The smart thing to do would be to back down, to accept that I was outmatched and outgunned by forces I didn't fully understand. The smart thing would be to protect my own career and freedom by staying away from the ceremony and pretending I had never discovered anything suspicious. But the smart thing wasn't always the right thing. If I was correct about what was happening, then backing down meant allowing my father's promotion to be used as cover for activities that could harm national security. It meant letting people who had manipulated my family and destroyed my reputation succeed in their plans. It meant abandoning everything I had sworn to protect when I took my oath as a soldier. I made coffee and spent the remaining hours until dawn, thinking through my options. The people threatening me had made one crucial mistake in their assessment of my situation. They assumed that the threat of personal consequences would be enough to deter me from action. They had misunderstood the fundamental nature of military service and the obligations that came with it. When I had sworn my oath, I had promised to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. That oath didn't come with exceptions for situations where fulfilling it might be personally costly or professionally dangerous. If anything, those were exactly the situations where the oath mattered most. By 8 in the morning, I had made my decision. I was going to attend Dad's ceremony, but not as a family member seeking reconciliation. I was going as an intelligence specialist, conducting a counterintelligence operation against what appeared to be a significant threat to national security. The first step was to contact Rachel Kim and brief her on everything I had discovered, including the threatening phone call. I needed official backup and support, people with more authority and resources than I possessed working to understand and counter whatever was being planned. Rachel listened to my complete briefing without interruption, asking clarifying questions about sources and methods, but not questioning the fundamental validity of my concerns. When I finished, she was quiet for several minutes. "Sarah, what you're describing suggests a sophisticated intelligence operation with domestic and international components. If you're right, this goes far beyond anything I can handle alone. I need to brief my supervisors and possibly coordinate with other agencies." "How long will that take?" "Longer than we have. The ceremony is tomorrow, and bureaucratic processes don't move that quickly. If we're going to prevent whatever is planned, we need to act on incomplete information and sort out the jurisdictional issues afterward." "What do you need from me?" "Everything you have, all your research, all your analysis, all your evidence, and I need you to stay away from the ceremony until we can provide proper support and protection." I had expected that response, but I couldn't accept it. "Rachel, if I stay away, we lose our best chance to observe whatever is happening. I'm the only one who has been investigating this comprehensively, and I'm the only one who will be able to recognize when something doesn't fit the normal patterns of a military ceremony. You're also the one who received direct threats, which means they're watching you specifically. If you show up at the ceremony, you'll compromise any chance we have of conducting covert surveillance, not if they think I've been neutralized as a threat." I outlined the plan that had been forming in my mind since the threatening phone call. If the people behind this believed that intimidation would be enough to keep me away, then my unexpected appearance at the ceremony would catch them off guard. They would be prepared for my absence, not my presence, which would give me and any official support a tactical advantage. Rachel was skeptical, but she agreed that the plan had merit if it could be executed safely. We spent the next several hours coordinating with her contacts in federal law enforcement and military intelligence, building a support network that could provide backup and intervention if my surveillance detected actionable threats. The arrangements were necessarily hasty and incomplete, but by early afternoon we had established protocols for communication, evidence gathering, and emergency response. I would attend the ceremony wearing concealed recording equipment, maintain contact with Rachel's team through encrypted channels, and document everything I observed for later analysis and potential prosecution. The personal cost of the plan was significant. Attending the ceremony would almost certainly expose me to retaliation from the people who had threatened me, and it would likely destroy whatever remained of my relationship with my family. But those considerations seemed secondary compared to the potential consequences of allowing a major intelligence operation to proceed unchallenged. That evening I spent hours preparing for what would likely be the most dangerous mission of my military career. I studied the ceremony schedule, the facility layout, the security protocols, and the backgrounds of every attendee whose activities had raised suspicions during my investigation. I memorized faces, names, and known associations, building a mental database that would allow me to recognize significant interactions and conversations. I also prepared for the possibility that the mission would end badly for me personally. I wrote detailed reports of everything I had discovered, sealed them in envelopes addressed to appropriate authorities, and arranged for their delivery if I failed to check in within 48 hours of the ceremony. If something happened to me, the investigation would continue without interruption. The hardest part was writing a letter to Dad, explaining why I'd felt compelled to investigate activities connected to his promotion ceremony. I tried to convey my love and respect for him while also expressing my determination to protect him from being used as an unwitting cover for activities that violated everything he had spent his career defending. I sealed the letter without reading it again, knowing that if I started second-guessing my words, I would lose the resolve necessary to see the mission through to completion. The morning of the ceremony dawned clear and cold, with the kind of crisp autumn air that made everything seem sharper and more vivid. I dressed in my dress blues with extra care, knowing that this might be the last time I wore the uniform with honor rather than under suspicion or disgrace. The base was buzzing with activity when I arrived, several hours before the ceremony was scheduled to begin. Military personnel, civilian contractors, and security teams were making final preparations for an event that would host some of the most senior officials in American government and military leadership. I used my security clearance to access areas where I could observe the setup and arrival procedures, noting which attendees were arriving early, who they were meeting with, and whether their behavior matched the patterns I had identified during my investigation. The first anomaly appeared around 10 in the morning when 3 of the attendees I had flagged as suspicious arrived together in a vehicle that wasn't part of the official transportation arrangement. They were escorted directly to a private conference room in a section of the command center that wasn't part of the official ceremony venue. I managed to position myself where I could observe the entrance to that conference room, using routine military activities as cover for my surveillance. Over the next 2 hours, I watched as additional suspicious attendees arrived and were escorted to the same location, always in small groups, always using routes that avoided the main ceremony preparation. By noon, nearly a dozen people were gathered in that private conference room, including several foreign nationals whose presence at the ceremony had raised red flags during my initial investigation. Whatever was happening in that room, it was clearly separate from and parallel to the official promotion ceremony. I activated my recording equipment and moved closer, trying to find a position where I could observe or overhear the private meeting. The building's architecture worked in my favor, providing maintenance corridors and utility spaces that allowed access to areas near the conference room without being obvious about my surveillance. What I heard through the ventilation system confirmed my worst fears and exceeded them in scope and audacity. The voices were discussing financial arrangements, technology transfers, and coordination of activities that were clearly related to espionage and potentially treason. They spoke in coded language, but the meaning was unmistakable to someone with intelligence training. They were using Dad's promotion ceremony as cover for a major intelligence sale, transferring classified information about American military capabilities to foreign agents in exchange for substantial financial compensation. The attendees included American citizens in positions of trust and authority, who were betraying their oaths and their country for personal gain. I recorded everything I could, knowing that the evidence I was gathering could potentially prevent significant damage to national security. But I also knew that my presence had probably been detected by now, and that I was running out of time before security measures would prevent me from gathering additional intelligence. The ceremony was scheduled to begin in 2 hours, and I needed to determine whether the espionage activities would continue during the official proceedings, or whether they were being conducted separately to avoid detection by the larger crowd of attendees. I moved carefully through the building, mapping the movement patterns of the suspicious attendees and their associates, trying to determine how their activities intersected with the official ceremony schedule. What I discovered was a level of coordination and planning that suggested months or years of preparation. The official ceremony would provide perfect cover for the final stages of the intelligence transfer, with the presence of numerous foreign diplomatic representatives, providing legitimate reasons for international attendees to be present and interact with American officials. The espionage operation had been designed to hide in plain sight, using the prestige and patriotic atmosphere of a military promotion to mask activities that represented the complete antithesis of everything such ceremonies were meant to celebrate. As I continued my surveillance, I became aware that I was no longer the only one watching. Security personnel were beginning to take notice of my presence in areas where I didn't have obvious business, and I could see them communicating with each other in ways that suggested coordination and concern. The people behind the espionage operation had indeed been monitoring my activities, and they were now taking active measures to neutralize the threat I represent. I had perhaps 30 minutes before my surveillance would be terminated by force, and I needed to use that time to gather enough evidence to justify immediate intervention by Rachel's team. I activated the emergency communication protocols we had established, transmitting the locations, identities, and activities of the espionage network to federal agents positioned around the perimeter of the base. At the same time, I continued recording everything I could observe, knowing that the evidence I gathered in the next few minutes could make the difference between successful prosecution and seeing dangerous criminals escape justice. The confrontation, when it came, was swift and decisive. Security personnel approached me from multiple directions, clearly intending to detain me before I could enter further with their operation, but they had underestimated the preparation and coordination Rachel and I had put into play. Federal agents moved simultaneously with base security, but they were targeting the espionage network rather than me. The private conference room was surrounded and breached, just as I was being approached by security personnel who intended to remove me from the area. The next few minutes were chaos as two different law enforcement operations unfolded simultaneously in the same location. I found myself in the middle of a complex arrest operation, with espionage suspects being detained in one area while I was being questioned about my unauthorized surveillance activities in another. But the evidence I had gathered was already in the hands of appropriate authorities, and the intelligence transfer I had been trying to prevent was being interrupted by federal agents who had been briefed on the threat and given authority to act. The espionage operation that had been months in the planning was unraveling in real time, with suspects detained and evidence secured before they could complete their betrayal of American national security. As I watched handcuffs being placed on people who had been prepared to sell military secrets for personal gain, I felt a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. The immediate threat had been neutralized, but the cost included the destruction of my relationship with my family, and the end of what had been a promising military career. The ceremony honoring my father's promotion would proceed, but it would now be overshadowed by the arrests and investigation that had emerged from my unauthorized investigation. Instead of being the proudest day of his career, it would be remembered as the day a major espionage ring was exposed and dismantled. I had succeeded in my mission to protect national security, but I had failed in my hope that I could do so without causing pain and embarrassment for the family I loved. The aftermath of the arrests unfolded with the mechanical precision of a well-rehearsed operation. Federal agents moved through the command center like surgeons, isolating witnesses, securing evidence, and establishing perimeters that would contain the story until appropriate briefings could be conducted. I found myself in a small administrative office, still wearing my dress blues, giving my statement to Agent Kim while the sounds of continued investigation echoed through the hallways. "Sarah, what you accomplished here today prevented what could have been one of the most significant intelligence breaches in recent history," Rachel said, closing her notebook after 3 hours of detailed debriefing. The classified information they were preparing to transfer included advanced cybersecurity protocols, satellite communication frequencies, and strategic deployment plans that would have compromised ongoing operations worldwide. I nodded, but the satisfaction I should have felt was muted by the realization of what this meant for my family. What happens now, to the ceremony, to my father, to everyone who came here expecting to celebrate his promotion? The ceremony will proceed as scheduled. Your father's promotion is legitimate and well-deserved, and there's no reason his achievement should be overshadowed by the criminal activities of others. The arrests will be handled discreetly, and the official story will focus on a routine security investigation that uncovered unrelated criminal activity, and the people who were arrested, the ones who threatened me, they're facing federal charges for espionage, conspiracy to commit treason, and violation of multiple national security statutes. The evidence you gathered, combined with what we've been able to recover from their communications and financial records, should be sufficient for successful prosecution. Through the office window, I could see preparations for the ceremony continuing despite the disruption. Military personnel were adjusting seating arrangements, testing sound systems, and coordinating with security teams to ensure that the event would proceed smoothly. It was surreal to watch normal ceremonial preparations while knowing that hours earlier, this same location had been the site of a major counterintelligence operation. My phone buzzed with a text message from Danny. "Where are you? The ceremony starts in an hour and Mom is asking if you're coming." I stared at the message, realizing that my family still had no idea what had happened. They didn't know about the espionage ring, the arrests, or my role in uncovering the conspiracy. As far as they knew, I was still the unstable daughter who had been excluded from the ceremony for my own good and the family's protection. "I need to see my family," I told Rachel. "They deserve to know what happened, and I need to explain why I've been acting the way I have." "Sarah, I understand your desire to reconcile with your family, but you need to be careful about what information you share. Much of what happened today is classified, and there are ongoing investigations that could be compromised if details become public prematurely. I'm not asking to brief them on classified operations. I'm asking to tell my parents and brother that I'm not mentally unstable, that my questions and concerns were legitimate, and that the people who convinced them otherwise were using them to isolate me from this event." Rachel considered this for several minutes. "You can tell them that you uncovered criminal activity connected to the ceremony, that federal authorities confirmed your concerns were legitimate, and that your exclusion from family events was the result of a deliberate campaign by people who wanted to prevent you from attending today, but nothing about specific classified information or ongoing investigations." I agreed to the restrictions and left the administrative office, walking through corridors that were still buzzing with investigative activity. Federal agents were cataloging evidence, interviewing witnesses, and coordinating with military personnel to ensure that the ceremony could proceed without further disruption. As I walked toward the main auditorium where the ceremony would take place, I passed the conference room where the espionage meeting had been conducted. Crime scene technicians were photographing documents, collecting electronic devices, and mapping the layout for evidentiary purposes. The room that had been intended for the sale of American military secrets was now being processed as evidence in what would likely become one of the most significant espionage prosecutions in recent years. I found my family in the reception area outside the main auditorium, dressed in their formal attire and looking exactly like what they were, proud relatives preparing to witness a loved one's promotion to general officer rank. Mom was wearing her best dress, the navy blue one she saved for the most important occasions. Dad was in his dress uniform, looking distinguished and confident despite the stress he must have been feeling about the disruption to his ceremony. Danny and Jessica were standing together near the entrance, and I could see them scanning the crowd, presumably looking for me. When Jessica spotted me approaching, she nudged Danny and they both turned in my direction with expressions that mixed relief, concern, and residual skepticism about my mental state. "Sarah," Mom said when she saw me, her voice carrying that careful tone that had become so familiar over the past few months, "we weren't sure if you were coming. Are you feeling well enough to be here?" The question, intended as caring concern, highlighted exactly how successful the campaign against me had been. My own mother was still worried that my presence at Dad's ceremony might be evidence of poor judgment or psychological instability. "Mom, I need to tell you something important, all of you. The concerns you've had about my mental state, the questions about my behavior, the reasons you thought I shouldn't attend today's ceremony, they weren't based on anything real. Someone was deliberately feeding you false information about me to convince you that I was unstable." Dad's expression shifted from confusion to skepticism. "Sarah, sweetheart, I know this has been a difficult time for you, but no one was feeding us false information. We were concerned because we could see that you were struggling. What exactly did you see? What specific behaviors made you think I was having problems? The questions you were asking, the way you seemed suspicious of everything, the intensity in your voice when you talked about family matters," Danny said. "It was like you thought everyone was plotting against you. Someone was plotting against me, and they succeeded in convincing you that my recognition of that fact was evidence of paranoia rather than accurate assessment. I could see that they weren't convinced, that years of trust in their own perceptions weren't going to be overturned by simple assertions from me. I needed to provide them with information that would help them understand what had really been happening." 20 minutes ago, federal agents arrested 12 people who were using Dad's ceremony as cover for espionage activities. They were selling classified military information to foreign agents, and they needed to prevent anyone with intelligence training from observing their activities. The statement hit my family like a physical blow. Dad's face went pale. Mom grabbed his arm for support, and Danny stared at me with an expression that suggested he was trying to process information that didn't fit with anything he thought he understood about the situation. "That's impossible," Jessica said, her voice carrying a note of hysteria. "This is a military promotion ceremony. There can't be spies here." The ceremony provided perfect cover for their activities. High-ranking officials, foreign diplomatic representatives, classified facilities, and enough legitimate reasons for international contact that espionage activities would be difficult to detect. Dad found his voice first. "Sarah, are you saying that someone was using my promotion as cover for criminal activity?" "Yes, and they spent months convincing you that I was mentally unstable so that you would exclude me from the ceremony. They knew that an intelligence specialist with my training would be likely to notice things that didn't fit normal patterns. But how could they know that we would exclude you? How could they be sure you wouldn't attend anyway?" "Because they studied our family dynamics and identified the pressure points that would make you receptive to concerns about my mental state. They fed you information designed to make you question my judgment and my stability, and they did it gradually enough that you didn't recognize it as manipulation." Rachel Kim appeared at my elbow, having approached while I was focused on my family's reaction. "Excuse me, but I need to speak with Specialist Mitchell briefly." I introduced Rachel to my family as a federal agent who had been coordinating the investigation, and I could see their expressions change as they realized that my statements about espionage and arrests weren't delusions or exaggeration. "Ma'am," Dad said to Rachel, his military bearing automatically asserting itself when addressing a federal law enforcement officer, "can you confirm what my daughter has told us about criminal activity connected to today's ceremony?" "I can confirm that federal agents have made multiple arrests today in connection with espionage activities that were planned to coincide with your promotion ceremony. I can also confirm that Specialist Mitchell's investigation and surveillance were instrumental in identifying and stopping those activities. And the concerns about her mental state. The reasons we thought she shouldn't attend today." Rachel chose her words carefully. "Those concerns appear to have been fostered by individuals who had reasons to want Specialist Mitchell excluded from today's events. Her behavior and judgment, throughout this investigation, have been exemplary and consistent with her training and professional responsibilities." I watched my family absorb this information, seeing their understanding of recent months shifting and realigning as they realized how thoroughly they had been manipulated. The shame and confusion in their faces was painful to witness, but also validating in a way that I hadn't expected. "Sarah," Mom said quietly, "we owe you an apology. Several apologies. We should have trusted you, should have listened more carefully to what you were trying to tell us. You responded exactly the way they wanted you to respond. They understood your love for me and used it against all of us." An announcement over the facility's public address system indicated that the ceremony would begin in 15 minutes, and guests should take their assigned seats in the main auditorium. Dad looked torn between his desire to continue the conversation and his need to prepare for the most important moment of his military career. "We need to talk about this more. All of us. But right now I have a ceremony to attend." "Sarah, I know I don't have the right to ask this after what we put you through, but would you be willing to stand with your family today? Would you be willing to be there when I receive my star?" The question carried weight beyond the simple request for presence at a ceremony. He was asking if I could forgive them for doubting me, if I could set aside the pain of recent months to share in this moment that meant so much to all of us. "Dad, I wouldn't miss it for anything. This is your day, your achievement. Your moment of recognition for everything you've dedicated your life to serving." We made our way into the main auditorium, where hundreds of guests were taking their seats for the ceremony. Military personnel, government officials, family members, and community leaders filled the space with the kind of dignified anticipation that surrounded important military ceremonies. I took my seat with my family in the front section reserved for immediate relatives, wearing my dress blues and feeling, for the first time in months, like I belonged exactly where I was. The espionage ring had been neutralized, the threats against national security had been eliminated, and I was present to witness my father receive the recognition he had earned through decades of honorable service. The ceremony began with the traditional military formalities, the presentation of colors, the playing of the national anthem, remarks by senior officials about the importance of military leadership, and the significance of promotion to general officer rank. Throughout the formal proceedings, I found myself scanning the remaining attendees, my training automatically assessing whether anyone seemed out of place or potentially threatening. But the threat had been eliminated hours earlier, and what remained was exactly what it appeared to be: a celebration of military achievement and a recognition of the values and dedication that defined the best of American military service. When General Patricia Hayes, the four-star general presiding over the ceremony, called my father forward to receive his promotion, I felt tears that I hadn't expected. The emotions of the day, the stress of the investigation, the relief of reconciliation with my family, and the pride in Dad's achievement combined into something overwhelming and cathartic. Dad walked to the front of the auditorium with the bearing and confidence that had characterized his entire military career. He stood at attention while General Hayes read the citation recognizing his service and accomplishments, and then he remained motionless while she pinned the single star of a brigadier general to his uniform. "Ladies and gentlemen," General Hayes said to the assembled audience, "I present to you Brigadier General Robert Mitchell, United States Army." The applause was thunderous and sustained, a recognition not just of Dad's promotion, but of everything it represented about military service, dedication, and the willingness to sacrifice personal comfort for the greater good of the nation. But then something unexpected happened. Instead of returning to his seat or acknowledging the applause, Dad remained at attention, facing General Hayes. And then, to my complete surprise, General Hayes stepped forward and spoke again. "Before we conclude today's ceremony, I want to recognize someone whose actions today exemplified the best traditions of military intelligence and counterintelligence operations." She turned toward the audience, her eyes finding mine in the front row. "Specialist Sarah Mitchell, would you please join us?" I felt my heart stop. This wasn't part of any ceremony I had prepared for, and I had no idea what was happening or what was expected of me. But General Hayes was waiting. Dad was smiling with an expression of pride and surprise, and several hundred people were looking in my direction. I stood and walked to the front of the auditorium, my mind racing to understand what was happening. When I reached General Hayes and my father, she gestured for me to stand at attention beside Dad. "Ladies and gentlemen, earlier today, Specialist Mitchell uncovered and helped neutralize a significant threat to national security that was using this ceremony as cover for espionage activity. Her investigation, conducted at considerable personal cost and professional risk, prevented the compromise of classified information that could have endangered ongoing military operations and the lives of American service members worldwide." The audience was completely silent, absorbing information that recontextualized everything they thought they understood about the day's events. Specialist Mitchell's actions exemplify the oath that every service member takes to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. She recognized a threat that others missed. She pursued the truth despite personal consequences, and she placed the security of her nation above her own safety and career advancement. General Hayes reached into her uniform and withdrew something I couldn't immediately identify. "Specialist Mitchell, by the authority vested in me by the President of the United States and the Secretary of the Army, I hereby award you the Meritorious Service Medal for exceptionally meritorious conduct in the performance of outstanding service, while assigned to counterintelligence duty." She pinned the medal to my uniform while I stood in shocked silence, still trying to process what was happening: the ceremony I had been excluded from, the recognition I had never expected, the validation of everything I had sacrificed to uncover the truth. Furthermore, General Hayes continued, "Effective immediately, you are promoted to the rank of Staff Sergeant, with all the rights, privileges and responsibilities pertaining thereto." She removed my specialist rank insignia and replaced it with the chevrons of a Staff Sergeant, completing a promotion that I had been working toward for months, but had never expected to receive under these circumstances. The applause that followed was different from what had greeted Dad's promotion. It was smaller, coming primarily from military personnel, who understood the significance of what I had accomplished, but it was also more personal, more meaningful, because it represented recognition not just of achievement, but of courage and sacrifice. When the ceremony concluded, and the audience began to disperse, I found myself surrounded by people offering congratulations, asking questions about the investigation, and expressing gratitude for my service. Federal agents briefed senior military officials on the scope of the espionage ring that had been disrupted, while family members and friends tried to understand how a promotion ceremony had become the site of a major counterintelligence operation. Through it all, I kept looking at my father, seeing in his face a mixture of pride, concern, and something that might have been awe. His daughter had not only cleared her own name, but had also protected his ceremony and his career from being compromised by criminal activity. "Sarah," he said when we finally had a moment alone together, "I don't know how to apologize for what we put you through. We should have trusted you, should have known that your concerns were legitimate. Dad, they were professionals at manipulation. They understood exactly how to use your love for me against all of us, but we're your family. We should have known you better than that." I looked around the auditorium, seeing federal agents, still processing evidence, military personnel coordinating post-ceremony logistics, and family members trying to understand everything that had happened. "You know me now," I said. "That's what mattered." The weeks following the ceremony passed in a blur of debriefings, investigations, and gradual healing. The espionage ring that had used Dad's promotion as cover turned out to be even more extensive than we had initially realized. Federal prosecutors were building cases against 17 individuals across multiple states, including defense contractors, military personnel, and foreign agents, who had been operating in the United States for years. I spent countless hours in secure briefing rooms, helping investigators understand the methods and motivations of the people who had targeted my family. The psychological manipulation that had been used against my parents and brother was textbook intelligence tradecraft, designed to isolate potential threats through the exploitation of family dynamics and emotional vulnerability. "They studied your family for months," Agent Kim explained during one of our sessions. "Phone records show they were monitoring your communications, tracking your deployment schedules, even analyzing your social media presence, to understand how to most effectively drive wedges between you and your relatives." The thoroughness of their operation was both impressive and disturbing. They had identified me as a potential threat early in the planning process, and had spent considerable resources ensuring that I would be excluded from the ceremony through methods that would appear organic and family-driven rather than externally imposed. The person who initially contacted your brother with concerns about your mental state was someone with extensive training in psychological operations, Rachel continued. "They knew exactly how to phrase their observations to trigger protective instincts in your family members, while simultaneously making you appear unstable if you tried to defend yourself." Understanding the sophistication of the operation helped explain how my family had been so thoroughly convinced of my instability, but it also highlighted how close the espionage ring had come to success. If I hadn't trusted my instincts and continued investigating despite the personal cost, classified information worth millions of dollars would have been transferred to hostile foreign governments. The legal proceedings moved forward with the methodical precision of federal prosecution. Several of the arrested individuals pled guilty in exchange for cooperation agreements, providing information that helped investigators understand the full scope of the network. Others maintained their innocence and prepared for trials that would likely result in life sentences if they were convicted. Dad's promotion proceeded without further incident, and he assumed his new responsibilities as the head of a joint cybersecurity task force. His first priority was implementing enhanced security protocols, designed to prevent the kind of infiltration that had nearly compromised his own promotion ceremony. "It's ironic," he told me during one of our regular dinners together, a tradition we had re-established as our family worked to rebuild the trust that had been damaged by months of manipulation. "I'm now responsible for preventing exactly the kind of operation that was used against our family." The personal healing took longer than the professional resolution. My relationship with Danny and Jessica required careful reconstruction, built on honest conversations about how they had been manipulated and why they had been so receptive to concerns about my mental state. "I think we wanted to believe that your problems overseas had affected you," Danny admitted during a particularly difficult conversation. "It made sense to us that someone who had been through what you experienced might struggle with readjustment. We were looking for explanations for behavior that seemed different, and when someone provided those explanations, we accepted them too easily. Jessica was more direct in her assessment. I was jealous of your relationship with Mom and Dad, the way they talked about your service with such pride. When someone suggested that you might not be as perfect as they thought, I wanted to believe it was true. Her honesty was painful but necessary. The manipulation had succeeded because it exploited existing tensions and insecurities within our family, turning normal sibling rivalry and parental concern into weapons that could be used to isolate and discredit me. Mom struggled the most with accepting what had happened. As someone who prided herself on being able to read people and situations accurately, she found it difficult to acknowledge how completely she had been deceived by professionals whose job was deception. I kept thinking that I should have known, she told me one afternoon as we sat in her garden, working together to plant bulbs for the spring flowers that would bloom long after the current crisis had become family history. You're my daughter. I should have been able to see through their lies. Mom, they were intelligence professionals with years of training in psychological manipulation. The fact that they could fool you doesn't reflect poorly on your judgment. It reflects on their skill and the resources they were willing to commit to their operation. But I understood her struggle with self-doubt because I was experiencing my own version of it. Despite the recognition I had received and the successful resolution of the case, I couldn't help wondering if there were signs I had missed, if I had acted quickly enough, if I could have prevented some of the pain my family had experienced. The promotion to staff sergeant came with new responsibilities and opportunities. I was assigned to a counterintelligence unit that specialized in domestic threats, work that drew directly on the experience I had gained during the investigation of my own family's situation. My first major case involved another family that had been targeted for manipulation by foreign intelligence services. A Navy captain's wife had been recruited by agents who convinced her that her husband was involved in illegal arms sales, driving a wedge between them that provided access to classified information about submarine operations. Working with that family, helping them understand how they had been manipulated and assisting in their healing process, gave me perspective on my own experience. I could see how the techniques that had been used against us were part of a broader pattern of operations designed to exploit American families and military personnel. The good news, I told the Navy captain's wife during one of our conversations, is that once you understand how these operations work, you become much more resistant to them in the future. Your family will be stronger because of what you've survived. I believed that because I was seeing it in my own family. The experience of being manipulated, and then discovering the truth had made us more careful about accepting information at face value, more willing to ask difficult questions, and more committed to maintaining open communication even when conversations became uncomfortable. Dad's work with the cybersecurity task force led to the development of new protocols for protecting military families from the kind of psychological operations that had been used against us. Military personnel received training on recognizing manipulation tactics, family members were educated about the warning signs of intelligence targeting, and support systems were established for families who might be experiencing suspicious approaches or pressure. Your case became the foundation for everything we're doing now, Dad told me during a briefing on the new program. The methods they used against us are being used against other military families across the country, and now we have the knowledge and tools to recognize and counter those operations. The medal ceremony that had surprised me during Dad's promotion led to additional recognition and opportunity. I was invited to speak at military conferences about counterintelligence operations, sharing lessons learned from my experience without compromising ongoing investigations or classified methods. The most important thing to remember, I told audiences of military personnel and their families, is that your instincts and training are valuable even when people you trust are telling you to ignore them. If something doesn't feel right, if patterns don't make sense, if people are trying to convince you that your own perceptions are unreliable, those are exactly the times when you need to trust yourself most. The speaking engagements led to consulting opportunities with other military units and law enforcement agencies dealing with similar threats. I found myself becoming something of an expert on family-targeted intelligence operations, a specialization I had never planned, but that felt like a natural extension of my military service. 1 year after the ceremony, Dad was promoted again, this time to Major General with 2 stars. The promotion ceremony was smaller and more intimate, attended by family and close colleagues, who who understood the significance of the moment, not just as professional advancement, but as validation that the previous year's events had not damaged his career or reputation. I stood with my family during that ceremony, wearing my dress blues with the staff sergeant chevrons and the meritorious service medal that had been earned through the most difficult period of my life. As I watched Dad receive his second star, I reflected on how much had changed since the previous ceremony, and how much stronger our family had become through surviving betrayal and manipulation. General Hayes presided over this ceremony as well, and afterward she pulled me aside for a private conversation that would change the direction of my career once again. Staff Sergeant Mitchell, I've been following your work over the past year, and I have a proposition for you. We're establishing a new unit focused specifically on protecting military families from foreign intelligence operations. I'd like you to consider leading that unit. The offer was both an honor and a responsibility that I hadn't expected. Leading a specialized unit would mean promotion to Sergeant First Class, assignment to a position with significant authority and resources, and the opportunity to develop programs that could protect thousands of military families from the kind of manipulation my family had experienced. Ma'am, I'm honored by the offer, but I need to ask whether this assignment would require me to relocate away from Fort Campbell. Actually, the unit would be based here, allowing you to maintain your family connections while serving in a role that draws directly on your unique experience and expertise. I accepted the position, and 6 months later I found myself leading a team of counterintelligence specialists, psychologists, and family counselors dedicated to identifying and countering foreign intelligence operations that targeted American military families. Our first major success came when we identified and disrupted a Chinese intelligence operation that had been recruiting military spouses through social media platforms, using romantic entanglements to gain access to classified information about Pacific Fleet operations. The operation had been ongoing for 3 years and had compromised information about submarine deployments, aircraft carrier movements, and joint exercises with allied nations. This is exactly the kind of threat that your unit was designed to counter, General Hayes told me during a briefing on the Chinese operation, long-term patient intelligence gathering that exploits personal relationships and family dynamics to gain access to classified information. The work was challenging but deeply satisfying. Every operation we disrupted, every family we protected, every intelligence threat we neutralized felt like vindication for everything my own family had endured. We were using our painful experience to prevent other families from suffering similar manipulation and betrayal. 2 years after Dad's first promotion ceremony, I received word that I had been selected for officer candidate school. The recommendation had come from General Hayes, supported by Dad and other senior officers who had observed my work with the Family Protection Unit. You've demonstrated leadership, initiative, and a unique understanding of modern intelligence threats, General Hayes explained during my selection interview. The Army needs officers who can bridge the gap between traditional military operations and the complex family-targeted operations that represent an emerging threat to national security. Accepting the appointment to OCS meant leaving my current position and my family for several months of intensive training, but it also represented the opportunity to serve at a higher level and with greater authority to develop programs that could protect military families nationwide. On the evening before I left for officer candidate school, my family gathered for dinner at Mom and Dad's house. It was the same dining room where I had confronted them about their concerns regarding my mental state, the same table where we had struggled to understand how we had been manipulated by professionals whose job was deception. I'm proud of you, Dad said as we finished dessert. Not just for what you accomplished during the investigation, but for how you've used that experience to help other families. You've turned something painful into something meaningful. Mom reached across the table and took my hand. I'm sorry it took us so long to understand what was happening. I'm sorry we doubted you when we should have trusted you. You responded the way any loving family would respond to concerns about someone they cared about. The people who manipulated us understood that love and used it against all of us. Danny and Jessica had been quieter than usual during dinner, and I could see that they were still processing their own roles in what had happened. The guilt and shame they felt about doubting me was something they continued to struggle with, despite my repeated assurances that they had been victims of professional manipulation. Sarah, Danny said as we were preparing to leave, I want you to know that we'll never make that mistake again. We'll never let anyone convince us to doubt you or exclude you from family events. I know, and I want you to know that what happened doesn't change how I feel about any of you. We're family, and family means we protect each other even when it's difficult. As I drove back to my apartment that night, I reflected on how much my understanding of family loyalty and service had evolved over the past 2 years. The experience of being betrayed by manipulation, of fighting to uncover the truth despite personal cost, and of ultimately being vindicated and recognized had taught me lessons that no military training could have provided. I had learned that trust is both more fragile and more resilient than I had previously understood. It can be damaged by professional manipulation, but it can also be rebuilt through honest communication and shared commitment to truth. I had learned that love sometimes requires questioning the people you care about most, even when that questioning is painful and unwelcome. Most importantly, I had learned that service to country sometimes means protecting not just against foreign enemies, but against the more subtle threats that target the families and relationships that give meaning to our sacrifice. Officer candidate school would be the beginning of a new chapter in my military career, but it was built on the foundation of everything I had learned during the most difficult period of my life. The uniform I would wear as an officer would carry the same commitment to truth, family, and service that had sustained me through betrayal and vindication. As I prepared for sleep that night, I thought about the letter I had written to Dad before attending his first promotion ceremony, the one where I had tried to explain why I felt compelled to investigate activities that threatened his reputation and our family's honor. I had never given him that letter, but its sentiments remained true. Family is what you fight for, what you protect, what you refuse to let others destroy through manipulation or deception, and sometimes, the greatest act of love is refusing to stay silent when silence would allow harm to continue. The ceremony where I had been excluded, mocked, and dismissed had become the foundation for a career dedicated to protecting other families from similar threats. The uniform that had been treated as a symbol of my instability had become the foundation for recognition and advancement. The family relationships that had been damaged by professional manipulation had been rebuilt stronger than before. In the morning, I would begin the journey toward becoming an officer in the United States Army. But tonight, I was simply Sarah Mitchell, daughter, sister, and soldier, grateful for the love that had sustained me through the darkest period of my life and confident in the future that love had made possible. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.